My brother's wife accused me of draining $12,000 from my parents' joint account, and my entire family demanded I pay it back, or they would cut me out of the will before my father even had a chance to finish signing it. What they didn't know was that I work in IT security for a living. I trace unauthorized access for a living. And the moment my sister-in-law said the words, "Someone logged in from outside the house," I already knew exactly where to look. One USB drive at Sunday dinner didn't just clear my name. It ended a marriage. I was on my couch eating leftover pad thai and watching a home renovation show I didn't care about when my phone rang. It was my brother, and I remember thinking it was strange because he almost never calls me directly. He texts, usually something clipped and transactional. "Can you pick up mom's prescription? Did you RSVP for Thanksgiving?" A phone call meant something had gone sideways. "Hey," I said, setting the container down. His voice was tight. Not angry exactly. More like someone who had already decided what they thought and was now performing the formality of informing me. "Mom and Dad found out about the transfers," he said. I had no idea what he was talking about. What transfers? He let out a short breath, impatient, like I was already wasting his time. $12,000, he said. From the joint savings account. The one Dad set up for the two of them when he retired. Someone moved it in 3 separate transfers over 6 weeks. 4,000, 4,000, 4,000. Bridget noticed it when she was helping Mom balance the checkbook last weekend. I felt something cold settle in my chest. "That's terrible," I said. "Have they called the bank?" There was a pause that lasted just a beat too long. "We know it was you," he said. I laughed, not because it was funny, because the accusation was so completely absurd that my body didn't know what else to do with it. "Me?" I said. "Why would I steal from Mom and Dad? You have access. You're the one who set up their online banking 2 years ago. You have the login. You know their passwords." "I set it up so they wouldn't have to call the bank every time they needed to check a balance," I said. "I wasn't stealing from them. I would never touch their money. That's their retirement. That's everything they saved." "Bridget ran the numbers," he said, "and the IP address on the transfers traces back to your zip code." I went very still. He kept going. "I want you to make it right," he said. "All of it, before we involve anyone else. Mom is devastated. Dad won't even say your name right now. Just put the money back and we'll figure out the rest later." "I need you to listen to me very carefully," I said, and my voice came out steadier than I expected. "I did not touch that account. I am going to look into this myself. Do not do anything until I call you back." He had already hung up. I set the phone on the coffee table and sat with the silence for a moment. My apartment felt smaller than usual. The TV was still on, some man in a flannel shirt tearing out a wall, talking cheerfully about load-bearing beams. I turned it off. I knew the feeling in my chest. I had felt it before, in smaller doses, at family dinners when my sister-in-law would make a comment about my apartment being cozy or ask me in front of everyone whether I was still just doing tech support. A low, persistent dismissal that I had always written off as her being competitive or insecure. But this was different. This was a calculation. And whoever made it had counted on me not knowing how to fight back. They miscalculated. I'm a cybersecurity analyst at a mid-sized financial services firm. I've spent the last 6 years investigating unauthorized access, tracing digital footprints, writing incident reports that end careers. I don't just know how to use computers. I know how computers keep receipts. Every login, every session, every device that touches a server, it leaves a trace. And if someone used my parents' online banking credentials to move money, they left a trail I could follow. But before I went anywhere near the technical side of this, I needed to understand the context. Because my training had taught me that fraud doesn't happen in isolation. There's always a pressure point. There's always a reason. I thought about my brother. He was 40, 3 years older than me, and had spent most of his adult life trying to project a version of success he hadn't quite achieved. He worked in commercial real estate and had for years, but the market in our city had been brutal for the past 18 months. I knew he'd lost 2 listings back to back. I knew because my mother had mentioned it in passing with that particular anxious tone she used when she was worried about him, but pretending she wasn't. Then I thought about Bridget. Bridget had been in my family for 4 years. She was polished in the way that made people use words like put together and impressive before they knew her well enough to use more accurate words. She managed the household finances because, as she had announced at dinner once, my brother was a big picture person and she was a details person. She had a real estate license she rarely used, a gym membership she talked about constantly, and a habit of referring to things my parents owned as family assets in a way that had always made the back of my neck prickle. She was also the one who had noticed the missing money. She was the one who had done the math on the IP address. I opened my laptop. I started with what I could access legally and without alerting anyone. I pulled up my own account logs from the bank's customer portal. I still had viewer access from when I set everything up, though I'd never used it for anything after handing my parents their login credentials. I wasn't going to touch anything, I just wanted to see the timestamps. The 3 transfers had gone out on a Tuesday afternoon, a Saturday morning, and a Thursday evening over the course of 6 weeks. Tidy amounts. Patient intervals. Someone who wasn't panicking, who was being methodical. Then I looked at the device metadata attached to those sessions. The bank's portal shows basic session information to account holders. Browser type, general location, time of access. It's not granular, but it's something. All 3 sessions were initiated from the same browser on what appeared to be a Windows device. I use a Mac. I have used a Mac exclusively for 8 years. Every device I own runs on Apple software. I don't own a single Windows machine. I leaned back. There was more. The general location listed for all 3 sessions was not my zip code. It was the broader metro area, yes, but the sessions clustered around a part of the city that was a 20-minute drive from my apartment. I knew that part of the city. Bridget's mother lived there. Bridget had mentioned it enough times. Sunday dinners, quick trips to check on her, the parking being terrible near her building. But that alone wasn't enough. I needed something more definitive. I pulled up LinkedIn and spent an hour going through Bridget's profile and then the profiles of people she was connected to. She had listed herself as a real estate and investment consultant for the past 2 years. I clicked through. The firm she was supposedly consulting for had no website, a registered address that came back to a shared office suite downtown, and a review on Google from 8 months ago that said simply, "Never heard of them." The business license, which is public record in our state, had been filed under a name I didn't recognize, a woman named after Bridget's college roommate, whose Instagram I found in 20 minutes of digging. They were still close. The roommate had posted a photo 6 weeks ago with the caption, "Business partners and best friends." So Bridget had a shell consulting business co-registered with her college roommate, filed 2 years ago, the same year she had started referring to my parents' home as a family asset. I went back to the bank records. The transfers had gone out to an external account. I couldn't see the destination from the portal, but I noted the routing prefix. It matched a regional credit union, not a major bank. The kind of account that could be opened quickly, with minimal scrutiny, and closed just as easily. I printed everything I had, the session logs, the location data, the LinkedIn inconsistencies, the business registration, the routing information. I organized it into a folder, the way I would at work, the way I always did when I was building a case. Then I sat back and thought about what I was about to do. My parents were in their late 60s. My father had worked 31 years as a high school chemistry teacher. My mother had done bookkeeping for a local pediatric office until she retired 5 years ago. That $12,000 was not a rounding error in their lives. It was a significant portion of what they had set aside for emergencies, for supplementing their Social Security, for the small, careful cushion that let them sleep at night. And someone who sat at their Thanksgiving table and called them by affectionate nicknames had taken it in small, patient bites, counting on no one to look closely enough. I called my brother back. "I want everyone together," I said. "Sunday dinner. Tell Mom I'll bring dessert." "Why?" he asked. "Do you have the money?" I have something better, I said. I'll see you Sunday. I hung up before he could argue. The drive to my parents' house took me through the older neighborhood where I grew up, past the elementary school with the cracked front steps that had never been repaired, past the gas station where I used to buy Slurpees in the summer. The houses here were modest and well kept, the kind of neighborhood where people put out American flags on the 4th of July and actually meant it. My parents had lived in the same house for 34 years. The gutters needed replacing, and my father had been meaning to repaint the shutters for 3 summers in a row. They were not wealthy people. They were careful people. I parked behind my brother's car. Bridget's SUV was in the driveway, right up close to the garage door like she lived there. I sat for a moment and breathed. I was not nervous. I want to be clear about that. I was not the girl who had always tried to smooth things over, who had apologized for taking up space, who had absorbed the low-level friction of being the younger, less conventionally successful sibling without complaint. I was a professional who had spent 6 years finding out exactly what people tried to hide inside their own computers, and I was very, very good at my job. I took my laptop bag off the passenger seat. My folder was inside. My laptop was inside, already queued up. I went in without knocking. The house smelled like pot roast, and I made a mental note to get my mother a new cookbook for her birthday. She made pot roast every time she expected a serious conversation, had done it my entire life, and at some point it had stopped being comfort food and started being a warning signal. Everyone was in the living room. My father was in his armchair, which was significant because he only sat in that chair when he was either watching football or deeply unhappy. My mother was on the couch beside my brother, her hands folded in her lap, her eyes red at the corners. Bridget was beside my brother on his other side, her posture perfect, her expression carefully arranged into something between concern and reluctant patience. She looked up when I walked in. Something flickered behind her eyes, not guilt, more like recalculation. "Thanks for coming," my brother said, and he managed to make it sound like I was the one who had inconvenienced everyone. "Of course," I said. I pulled a chair from the corner and sat down across from them, setting my bag at my feet. "We were hoping you'd come with the money," Bridget said. She kept her voice gentle, which was impressive. She had a real talent for performing sincerity. "I know you were," I said. My mother pressed her lips together. "Honey," she said, "we don't want to make this bigger than it has to be. Your father and I just want to understand why." "I didn't take the money, Mom." My brother shifted. "The bank log shows the login came from your area." Bridget checked. "Your area," I said. "That's a very broad statement. What specifically did the log show?" Bridget blinked. "The location matched your zip code." I pulled it up on the portal myself. "Which zip code?" I asked. She paused for just a fraction too long. "It was in the city, near where you live." "I live in the 6614, I said. "The sessions came from the 6647. That's a 20-minute drive. I know because I looked it up. And the 6647 is where your mother lives, Bridget." The room went very quiet. "That doesn't mean anything," my brother said quickly. "IP locations aren't exact. Everyone knows that." "You're right," I said. "They're not courtroom evidence on their own." That's why I also looked at the device. I reached into my bag and opened my laptop. All 3 sessions were on a Windows device. I have used a Mac exclusively since 2016. I don't own anything that runs Windows. You can check every device registered to my home network and you will not find one. Nobody said anything. "I also looked at the routing number for the destination account," I continued. "It traces to a regional credit union with branches primarily on the northwest side of the city, near the 6647. I pulled the folder out of my bag and set it on the coffee table. And then I did a little background research. I turned the laptop around so the screen faced them, because I'm very good at finding things people assume are hidden. The screen showed Bridget's LinkedIn page, then the business registration, then the Instagram post from the college roommate. "The consulting firm you've been running for 2 years, I said, looking at Bridget. "The one registered to you and your college roommate. The one with the office address in a shared suite downtown and no public-facing clients. The one that seems to receive funds from sources that don't show up anywhere on your joint tax filing with my brother. My brother turned to look at his wife. "This is insane," Bridget said. Her voice was still controlled, but something had shifted beneath it, a hairline fracture. "She's making things up. She's trying to deflect. She's the one with the access." "She set up our banking," my mother said slowly. "She wasn't talking to me. She was talking to herself, working something out." "I set up their banking and then I never touched it again," I said. "I gave them their login information on a sticky note and told them to change the password. Which I believe you did, Mom, because you mentioned it at Easter 2 years ago. I don't have your current credentials. I never asked for them." "Then how did you know the password?" Bridget snapped. "I didn't," I said, "and neither would anyone else who only had the original set of credentials. But someone who helped my mother manage the checkbook every other weekend would have seen her log in, would have watched her type the password, might have even offered to help, asked her to read it out while she wrote it down." My mother made a small sound. My brother had gone completely still. He was staring at his wife, and she was no longer looking at him. She was looking at the floor. "Bridget," my brother said. His voice was very quiet. "Tell me this isn't what it looks like." She didn't answer. "Tell me," he said again. "I needed it," she said finally, and it came out stripped of the careful tone, just flat and tired. "We owe more than you know. The business isn't what I told you it was. There were investors. There were promises. I needed a bridge until things stabilized." "You took from my parents," he said. "It was supposed to be temporary." $12,000, he said, "from retirement savings. I was going to pay it back." "You blamed my sister." Her jaw tightened. She picked the most logical suspect. I looked at my mother. She had gone the particular shade of pale that I associated with bad news delivered in waiting rooms. My father hadn't moved from his armchair. He was looking at Bridget with an expression I had never seen on his face before. Not anger exactly, more like the total absence of warmth. Like someone had turned off a light behind his eyes. "Get out of my house," he said. It was the quietest voice I had ever heard him use, and it was the most final. Bridget stood. She looked at my brother. Her composure had reassembled itself into something brittle and defensive. "I did what I had to do," she said. "You have no idea the pressure I've been under." "I asked you to tell me," he said. "Every time I asked you about the business, you said it was fine. You said it was great. You said we were building something." She picked up her purse from beside the couch and walked out. We heard the front door close with a careful, controlled click that somehow felt worse than a slam. The four of us sat in the living room for a long moment. My mother was the first to speak. She turned to me and said, "I believed her." She said it simply, without defense. "I believed her over you, and I don't know how to tell you how sorry I am for that." I looked at my mother. I'd loved her my whole life with the complicated, resilient love of someone who has sometimes been disappointed by her, but never doubted that she loved me back. I knew she hadn't meant for it to happen the way it did. I knew the accusation had felt logical to her in the moment, had slotted neatly into an old story she told herself about who was reliable and who was a question mark. "I know," I said. My father hadn't spoken again. He was still in his chair, and he looked, for the first time in my life, old. Not tired. Old. Like the evening had aged him visibly. I filed a report with the bank the following morning. The compliance team opened an investigation. Because the transfers had gone to an external account and involved identity-related access, the case was forwarded to the fraud division. I didn't have to do anything after that except provide my documentation, which I did, organized and labeled the way I had organized it for the dinner, because I had known it would eventually end up in someone's hands who needed to read it clearly. The bank recovered 2 of the 3 transfers through the credit union. The third had already been withdrawn. Bridget's attorney later argued she had intended to repay the funds, which is a thing attorneys say when their clients have run out of better options. The civil judgment came 3 months later. Bridget was ordered to repay the full amount plus interest. I was told she also had separate legal exposure related to the shell business, but that was no longer my file to track. My brother filed for divorce 6 weeks after that Sunday dinner. He didn't tell me directly. My mother mentioned it the way she mentioned things that were too painful to frame as news, folded into the middle of a longer conversation about something else. "He's doing okay," she said. "He's staying with a friend from work. He asks about you sometimes." I visited my parents more after that, not out of obligation and not because I had been vindicated and wanted them to know it. I visited because my father looked older in a way that didn't reverse, and because my mother had started her apologies and I could tell she meant them and I didn't want to make her work for my attention indefinitely. I had my limits, and I had my distance, and I held both of them. But I was not interested in making the rest of her life a punishment. What I did not do was pretend that everything was fine. I did not slide back into being the sibling who absorbed whatever was handed to her and said nothing. The dynamic had shifted. They knew it. I didn't have to announce it. 6 months later, I was sitting at a rooftop restaurant with two of my closest friends, the kind of evening where the city looks like it was designed to make you feel like you're getting away with something, and my phone buzzed. It was a number I didn't recognize. I almost ignored it. Then something made me answer. It was my brother. "Hey," he said. "I know I don't have the right to ask you for anything." I waited. "I just wanted to say I'm sorry. I should have asked you for your side before I called you that night. I should have pushed back when Bridget started pointing fingers. I should have known." I thought about all the ways I could respond. I thought about the years of accumulated small moments where he had deferred to his wife's version of events over mine, where he had let her condescension slide because it was easier than confronting her, where he had treated me like the family's least complicated piece while I had quietly been the one who set up their banking and drove Mom to her follow-up appointments and remembered every birthday. "I appreciate that," I said, "and I mean it. But I need you to know that I'm not the same person you've been treating as a given. I'm not going to pretend the last few months didn't happen." "I know," he said. "I don't expect you to. I wanted you to know I was wrong." There was something raw in his voice that I hadn't heard before, and I recognized what it was. He had spent his whole adult life living with someone who kept score and called it love, and now he was learning what real accountability felt like for the first time. "Okay," I said. "Okay?" "It's a start," I told him. "That's what I've got right now." We hung up. My friend raised her glass across the table, eyebrows lifted. "Everything good?" I picked up my own glass and thought about the Sunday dinner, the folder on the coffee table, the way my father's voice had gone completely quiet when he said, "Get out of my house." "Yeah," I said, "the ledger's finally balanced." There's a moment I keep coming back to, and it's not the one you'd expect. It's not when Bridget walked out the door, or when my father said, "Get out of my house," in that quiet, final voice. It's the moment right before I opened my laptop at that dinner table, when I looked around the room and understood that I had a choice. I could fold. I could write the check, absorb the loss, and go back to being the family's least complicated piece. Or I could do what I had been trained to do for 6 years. Follow the evidence wherever it led and let the truth do what truth does when you stop protecting people from it. I chose the second thing, and I think that choice started long before that Sunday. What I've learned about integrity. Real integrity. Not the kind you perform at holidays, but the kind that holds when everyone in the room is looking at you like you're the problem, is that it doesn't announce itself. It just keeps you from doing the wrong thing when the wrong thing would be so much easier. I didn't steal from my parents. I didn't steal because it would have been wrong, and I knew it would have been wrong. And no amount of financial pressure or family disappointment would have changed that. That's not a virtue I'm proud of. It's just a floor I refuse to go below. Bridget had no such floor. And without it, everything she built, the image, the marriage, the fiction of a successful business, eventually found its own level. What I've also learned is that being smart about something isn't enough on its own. I had the skills to find the truth from day one. I'd had them for years. But skills without the willingness to use them clearly, without flinching, without softening the outcome to protect someone else's comfort. That's just potential sitting in a drawer. The night my brother called me, I could have gone quiet. I could have said I need time to think about this and then spent that time talking myself out of fighting back. Instead, I opened a laptop and started pulling threads. Not because I was angry, though I was. Because I knew how to look, and I was done pretending I didn't. And then there's the part nobody talks about, which is how long it takes to actually hold your ground when the people you love are the ones pushing against you. My parents didn't believe me. My brother didn't believe me. The easiest version of that story ends with me crumbling under the weight of their certainty. But I had spent enough years being the responsible one, the quiet one, the one who absorbed the friction without comment. And somewhere along the way, I had decided that absorbing things silently is not the same as being strong. Strength is walking into that dining room with a folder and a laptop when everyone is expecting a check. Strength is saying, I did not do this, and then proving it. Not because you owe them the proof, but because you owe it to yourself. The ledger balanced. Not because the universe intervened, but because I did the work, held the line, and refused to let someone else's dishonesty become my debt. That's the only kind of accounting that ever really clears.